Welcome to Taming Disaster with Drones for Good podcast, presented by Aeros, part of GE Aviation, with additional financial support from First Eyes and Pix4D. Tune in for in-depth interviews, one-of-a-kind perspectives, and insightful conversations with industry leaders who are using drones to help prepare for, respond to, and recover from complex emergencies and major disasters around the world. And now, from the AIRT Studios in Miami, Florida, the heart of Hurricane Alley, here is your host, Christopher Todd.
All right, welcome to another edition of Taming Disaster Drones for Good. This is episode 5. It is Monday, July 27th, and really excited about today's guest. Brandon Morris is currently the Hazardous Materials Instructor at the Security and Emergency Response Training Center, or SERTC, and he's also the chief pilot for the Transportation Technology Center in Pueblo, Colorado. Prior to joining SERTC in 2014, he had 2 decades of experience responding to a wide array of HAZMAT, environmental, and oil and gas industry emergencies, as well as numerous natural disasters. Mr. Morris is also an OSHA Outreach Trainer through the University of Texas at Arlington and an instructor for the Red Cross. He attended Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University for Aerospace Engineering, Spartan College of Aeronautics, and holds numerous certifications, including Pro Board IFSAC Hazmat Technician, Fire Instructor 1 and 2, Radiation Safety Officer, Rescue Diver, Confined Space Rescue Technician, OSHA 500-501 Instructor, and, of course, a Part 107 Remote Pilot Certificate. Brandon, welcome to Taming Disaster. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Chris?
I'm good. It's great to have you aboard, and that's one hell of a resume.
Kind of long when I hear it all laid out like that.
No, it's all good, and I think I think we're going to learn over the next 30-40 minutes kind of why all those things come into play for all the amazing work you're conducting out there in Colorado at SERTC. But first, I always like to ask the guest, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get involved in unmanned systems and using drones for good? Was it something you started at an early age? Did it happen late in your career? What's the background on that?
Probably love of flight is where it all comes from. But, I went to Embry-Riddle and Spartan. I started flying when I was 13 years old. I got a full-time job at a steakhouse washing dishes so I could pay for my flight lessons. And back then, and this is going to date me a little bit, but I could buy 10 hours of block time for $400. And we were flying a little Piper with bad struts on one side, and that's what I learned to fly in. But I've always loved to fly. I like the freedom of it. And throughout the years, I've always went back and forth with aviation. I really like public safety. That's kind of my first love, I guess, once I started doing it. I did my first oil spill when I was 16 years old. I really like the response. I really like feeling like I'm doing good. So I always end up back in HAZMAT. But when I come over to SERTC back in 2014, the railroads were just starting in drones. And primarily the place that I work at is called the Transportation Technology Center. The whole goal of this site is to make transportation safer. So with BNSF kind of leading the way with drones, the idea was that we help along that path. So the first thing we did was we got our 333. We were one of the first ones to get a 333 out here. And then we also built a payload delivery system. So I actually built that system in my garage. And we were delivering what's called an area array, which is a remote chemical monitor. So we had an octocopter that could lift almost 300 pounds. We weren't lifting 300 pounds with it. We were only lifting 15, but we could fly out anywhere on a derailment scene, on an accident scene, an industrial incident, drop this chemical monitor off downwind, and then we were able to get real-time chemical data back. So
so that would be the drone flying over the incident to a specific point and dropping the sensor, or hovering with the sensor?
Dropping the sensor.
Okay.
I've never seen a way that actually works for air monitoring to fly around with an air monitor on the drone. So we'd fly out and drop that downwind, and then get the data back on the laptop, and then we could make decisions of our PPE, our respiratory protection, our response overall, based on that data and not just the guesses that we were having. And then it just kind of went from there. We started a drone training program. We worked real close with the railroads. We worked real close with a lot of industry. And we have our training program is called Mauser, Managing Unmanned Aerial Systems and Emergency Response. And we do a lot of testing out on the transportation technology side of things. And I've been with the program since the beginning.
Wow. So that's pretty amazing. So SERTC, again, Security and Emergency Response Training Center, Tell us a little bit about the campus out there. I mean, I know you've got like a really crazy, huge campus where you do a lot of fun, cool stuff that most guys would love. Tell us a little bit about what's the scene like out there?
I joke around a lot that, where was this job on career day in high school? I get to fly drones, wreck trains. I get to blow stuff up, set stuff on fire. Where was that during career day? We would have blown everybody else out of the gymnasium if we would have had that booth set up. So SERTC is part of the overall site. The overall site is 52 square miles. To put that in perspective, that's about 2.5 times the size of the island of Manhattan. So if you've ever been to Manhattan and tried to drive from one end to the other, multiply that times 2.5, and that's how big we are overall.
Wow.
We have 50 miles of track. We do testing for just about every mode of transportation out there. And then SERTC kind of feeds off that. We're the Center for Transportation Emergency Response through FEMA. Our organization is called the National Domestic Preparedness Consortium.
Okay.
We're the primary training provider for all public safety nationwide. It's just our specialty within that group is transportation emergencies. So we have classes like the Highway Emergency Response Specialist, what we call Tank Car Specialist, which is the derailment training that we do here. We have HAZMAT Technician. We offer quite a few classes, including the UAS course that's geared towards emergency response. So if we wreck a train on purpose, we do that all the time to make them safer, to figure out how they fail, how they derail, how different parts fail. Then that now comes to SERTC, and we get to use it as a training prop, so to speak, even though it's not a prop, it's a real rail car. Right now, I'm talking to you from one of our derailments. This is a 13-car derailment that I'm at right now that we set fire to. This is called the crude by rail derailment, the big fire derailment. But we can do explosions, we can do smoke, we can do leaks, and it's all life-size rail car. They're not props. They're real rail cars that have been involved in real derailments, and that gives the responders a chance to see what it's really like to be on something of this size.
That is completely cool. I mean, where else do you hear about people wrecking trains for research and then using drones for good? So just to be clear, so you guys it's highway transportation, it's railway transportation. Are you also doing air transportation out there?
Air transportation, surface transportation is what we focus on.
Okay.
We have a fuel transfer barge. We're out in the middle of the desert, but we have a fuel transfer barge where we train Coast Guard and responders that work out in the ocean how to transfer fuels from a barge over to a land-based transportation container.
Okay, so the specialty is really like hazardous materials and kind of the nuances off of that. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's our primary focus is hazardous materials transportation and emergencies. So intermodal, highway, rail, those are our three primary modes that we train on.
Okay. So backing up, so when you got into drones, you were under Section 333 first, or when did you start flying these things?
Right after I come on board in 2014, we applied for our 333.
Okay.
And when 107 come on, I mean, everybody's going the same direction there with the 333s.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Awesome. So now let's talk about the aircraft you guys use out there. I mean, I would think that you've got to have some really specialized configurations for the types of missions you're doing. Are you using off-the-shelf, consumer, prosumer, enterprise type gear? Are you building your own aircraft? Tell us a little bit about the fleet you have.
The answer to both of those is yes. So from a training perspective, you want people to train like they fight. You've heard that over and over. We don't want them flying something out here that they wouldn't be normally flying out in the field. They're not going to be flying a 53-pound octocopter with 29-inch carbon fiber blades on it in real life. That's not what most people fly. Most people fly DJI. So we have pretty much the whole spectrum of DJI from the Spark all the way up to the Matrice 210. And we don't have the 600 because we have that big heavy lift. It's kind of a duplication there. But then we also have custom builds. Harris Aerial helped us build the big octocopter. It's a custom job for the payload delivery system. We've had multiple airframes and stuff come through here. We helped Arion back before Arion was bought out by FLIR. We did some beyond visual line of sight testing out here in bad weather. We were flying the Sky Raider in 0-0 out past 5 miles.
Wow.
With the clouds on the deck. So we've got to do some pretty cool stuff like that. We work with some of the local colleges as well. We work with people like NOAA, testing some of their atmospheric monitors. We flew a fixed wing up to 2,000 feet at midnight, and we're right next to Denver airspace. So it had about $1 million chemical payload on board that had a thermal imager, had a CO and a CO2 detector on board. It had a disc that could collect samples from the air. And we flew that around at nighttime over an active fire on the north side of the facility to test that platform out. So that was a pretty fun project, getting to fly at 2,000 feet in the middle of the night.
And how are you getting authorization for that from the FAA? Are you working with them? Are you getting SGIs? Do you have a CO in place, or how does that work?
All the above. Most of the time, the people that come out here and do the testing are the ones that are responsible for getting their own authorizations and whatnot. But since we operate so closely with DOT, we have we have a kind of an open line to talk about how the right thing to the right way to do things is. So,
Okay.
hey, we want to do this, this, and this. What do we need to do? And it's literally a phone call away to ask those questions back and forth. And then BNSF has been a huge help. They've kind of paved the way for beyond visual line of sight with all the stuff that they're doing with their railway inspection technology. And so if I can't figure it out by talking directly to the FAA, I can pick up the phone and call BNSF and ask them, hey, how did you accomplish this? And they've been a tremendous help to us overall.
And does the fact that you have all that land, you've got all that acreage there, I would think bodes well for the fact that you're doing some of the specialized operations over your own property. I mean, is that on point, or am I kind of drifting there?
Well, no, you're directly on point. Most of the facility is confined to what we call the core area. So all of our giant labs where we crush rail cars and twist them in half and test them when they vibrate, all of our offices, SERTC itself, which is right behind me right now, we're all kind of in this one little wad right up front of the facility. And the rest of the 52 square miles is all track and testing facilities, and it's very, very remote. So the whole flying over people question is no, there's nobody out here. Our closest neighbors are 30 miles away in Pueblo, Colorado. To put that in perspective, we have the Pueblo Chemical Depot, Army Depot, just south of us, is closer to town than we are. So we're very, very remote out here, which gives us a lot of leeway with what we do because we're not flying over people as long as we geofence in the site.
Understood. Well, that's cool. So the types of missions that you're training people on for HAZMAT, I mean, obviously drones and unmanned systems right now are primarily gathering data. They're gathering imagery. I would think that that's really where the focus is on what you're doing now. But what are some of the specific types of operations that you'll typically train folks on?
That's always in flux, to be honest with you. I get the opportunity to work both sides of the fence. So coming from public safety and training at SERTC and being an instructor out here, I get to see that side of things, but I also get to go over on the transportation technology side of things and the very experimental side of things and do different testing out there. And I'm able to bridge the gap between the two. So any new technologies that come up that we're able to prove on the technology side of things with the railroads, with different transportation providers and technology providers, now I can take that experience from one side of the house and bring it over to public safety, and then we can integrate things like that into our training. One good example was we did a comparison of, this was on the technology side of things, we did a comparison of traditional surveying methods to drone-based LiDAR to see how close the two were. And we were getting between 3 and 5 centimeters with no calibrations and a blind test. And all the testing that we do, we're doing to the same level of every test that you've ever heard of, right? All the peer-reviewed papers, all our stuff is peer-reviewed. And so we're very methodical about how we do these tests. Well, then I'm able to come over to this other side. And when somebody asks me a question about LiDAR, I can tell them that experience out there that, yes, LiDAR is getting very, very close to ground-based technology. So if you're needing to survey a mountainside for an accident or avalanche abatement, I can actually speak to that based on the technologies that are happening on the other side of the house that normally public safety wouldn't get access to. So our training is always in flux based on that.
And are you seeing any specific types of LiDAR, like any units, any specific aircraft that you would recommend for agencies that want to go out there and start dabbling in this?
I would recommend partnering with somebody. It's not something you want to do on your own. There's a lot to it. It's not just buying a drone, strapping a LiDAR unit underneath and taking off flying. One, you need a lot of training on LiDAR. Two, you need a lot of training on how the IMU works on the drone itself. And then you need somebody that can make those two talk to each other. But then you need somebody that can work on the software side and the processing side to create the data that eliminates wayward data. So you need a team of people to make it work. Even today, even as far as we've come with all these technologies, and there's a lot of people out there that are making LiDAR systems for drones that are very reliable. But in the end, if you're just walking into this thing, you need to partner with somebody. I recommend finding a college. One, they're free labor. Don't tell anybody I said that on this podcast. But you've got a whole team of people that can work and come up with new, fresh ideas that maybe you wouldn't normally. and then find industry partners as well. So if you're already in industry, find another industry partner to specialize in what they specialize in. You can do what you're good at. They can do what they're good at. If you're in public safety, definitely. I mean, you look at the things like Southern Manatee is doing, partnering with industry, and they're doing things, we never imagined we'd be able to do in public safety because of that public-private partnership that they've got set up with DGI and some of the other folks they work with. Just be prepared to fail. We've all failed. I failed that big drone that I was talking about. I wrecked in front of FEMA.
Okay.
We had a really windy day, and I deployed the payload, and it takes a little while for the IMU to catch up with the new center of gravity. So as soon as I deployed the payload, the thing blew over, and I turned it into an agricultural drone. It was a plow. But I did that in front of about 40 FEMA personnel. When we're bragging about that was on my 149th flight was my last successful one. That was number 150. So I was kind of celebrating and maybe getting a little too cocky. And with 30-mile-an-hour wind gusts, it went over and plowed the ground right in front of everybody. So you got to be prepared to do stuff like that when you're pushing the envelope. So those would be my two big suggestions. One, brace yourself for failure because you're going to have a lot of it. Learn from it and move on. And two, find somebody to partner with. You do what you do. Find somebody else that does what they do, and you'd be amazed what you can achieve by partnering up with somebody like that.
Makes sense. Yeah, I think LiDAR is certainly an area where there's a lot of interest. We're seeing a lot of traction, especially with energy companies, utility companies, surveyors, even building inspections. But yeah, the data management side of it is, I think it's really an advanced level experience from the folks I've talked to who have wanted to start working with LiDAR. So
yeah, when you're generating gigabytes of data per minute, people aren't prepared for that. Where do I store it? How do I process it? Most of the time, your computer's not going to be up to it, especially if you're trying to do it on a laptop. You'll end up with a puddle of silicone when you're done. So there's a lot of things that you need to talk to people about before you get into LiDAR.
Yeah, it's start the processing on Friday night before you leave the office, and then come back on Monday, and hopefully it's rendered. Is that still happening?
Pray you don't come back to a blue screen of death.
Yeah.
Laptop overheated.
Exactly. So do you see automation coming into play with that? Where, how far out into the horizon do you see the day when we're going to have aircraft on state patrol vehicles or highway patrol vehicles where they can basically be deployed for this? You think it's feasible in the next 5 years?
Well, we're already seeing that on fire apparatus. So the photokite, we're already kind of seeing a model that would, and there's a lot of discussion about that. We could have an entire podcast about whether I think the photokite is a good idea or not, right? But in the end, it's got everybody talking. And that's the best thing I think about that photokite is that it's got everybody talking about how do we move forward in public safety and get it more permeation into what we do. Because just having one hovering overhead is priceless. Forget thermal sensors, forget all the other fancy gizmos and stuff you can attach to it. Just having that overhead view is priceless overall. And I think that's probably what we'll see from a law enforcement side of things is something similar to the path that photokites blazed on the fire apparatus, is something similar to that. So, we're trying to mitigate every question of safety that we can come up with by tying a tether to it and automating it overall. It can't fly away. You're not having to worry about batteries failing or any of that other stuff that you're worried about with a typical drone. You're not having to worry about tying up one of your troopers. Nobody has to sit there physically with the controller. It just hovers, and every once in a while you look over at the screen and point it in the direction you want to go. I think that's the path we'll see first is something similar to what photokite did. Yeah,
it's super exciting. And photokite's been getting a lot of good reviews off that technology. But yeah, the tether is somewhat restraining. If you want to go fly around and map an actual large scene, it's tough to do with the tether. So still some challenges both on the regulatory side. I think technology-wise, the technology is there, but how do we get the regulatory approval to make that happen? And I think we'll see that. I think we're working our way in that direction.
So long as we lose sight of where we were a decade ago when we didn't have anything at all. Everybody's trying to compare with the what ifs. I sure would like to be able to fly around and do all this, but just a few years ago, we weren't even able to put anything up in the air unless it was calling a helicopter for $5,000-$6,000 an hour or whatever they cost. As long as we don't lose sight of that we're still way further than we were just a decade ago. So as long as we keep that in focus.
Now, have you guys been doing any testing with remote ID or anything as far as manned, unmanned operations in joint airspace?
So BNSF is kind of leading the way with that, with the system that they have out there. What we've been looking more at, so no live testing, to just long story short, no.
Okay.
But what we have out here is we have the exact same communication system that the railroads at large have. I don't know if you've ever heard of positive train control. That was a big talking point and one that is pretty sensitive sometimes, but that's a giant communication network is what that amounts to on top of the existing railroad communication networks. And that's an advantage that the railroad has that nobody else does, is that communication network that ties all the tracks together overall to a command center. Well, we can leverage that and use that for testing. And that's all the conversations we've had out here, is leveraging that built-in network that we already have for pushing forward the envelope in other areas.
Okay. Now, what does the response scenario look like when there's a derailment? I mean, is it folks jumping on a plane, helicopters, cars, going out to the derailment, bringing their equipment out? Like, how do you train people to respond to these types of incidents?
So all of the above are true. It depends on the size of the derailment. One thing to keep in mind when you see the numbers for a derailment is, we have thousands of derailments a year. Well, in the railroad, a derailment, the term derailment is the same as a semi-truck hitting the rumble strips on a highway. It could be absolutely nothing. It could be a wheel set or a bearing failing or something along those lines. So a derailment isn't always like the derailment scene that I'm on right now. It's not always 400 cars off on fire, exploding everywhere. Sometimes it's just one car set off the tracks, and then that requires somebody to go out with a piece of heavy equipment, set it up, or jacks, and set it back up on the track. But when a larger derailment like the ones that you're talking about happen, the biggest challenge is organization and getting the local responders to work with the railroads themselves. And that's where SERTC comes in, is we teach people how to make that happen so that when a derailment does happen in a community, everybody knows exactly what to do. I pick up the phone, I call this number, they start bringing all of their assets out to the site, and that comes in through companies like CTEH that I used to work for that have jets that fly over the United States. Every time there's a major incident, they jump on a jet with all their air monitoring equipment, off they go. And they're there usually first thing. They can be there pretty rapidly. You got contractors that do the same thing. The railroads fly people all over the United States. So they show up to assess the scene as fast as possible. People are going to come in from all over the place on a derailment like this. But the biggest challenge is to figure out what to do first. It's just moving ahead. And that's a big part of what SERTC focuses on is enabling public safety to show up at a scene like this and move forward. Don't just stand there and stare at it and watch things get worse and worse and worse. We teach them how to break it down into bite-sized chunks with the information that they're getting from the railroads and keeping their community safer. And then you add drones on top of that. And then now that takes a lot of the fear out of it. Because a big part of the fear of a derailment is people aren't used to the size of these things. Your typical highway container that you pass on the highway, those are usually 8,000 gallons overall. The great big tankers that you pass on the highway that are scary to pass on the wrong side of the road, those are typically 8,000 gallons. Your typical rail container is 34,000 gallons, one of them. So now you get a 13-car derailment like the one I'm sitting in right now at our training site, and people get overwhelmed. They show up, they've never seen anything this big, so they do nothing. Well, you take a drone and you kind of detach the person from the incident for a moment, and you give them a second to look at it objectively. They take that drone and they fly up over the scene, and they get a smaller picture on the screen. It's not as scary, but now they can make plans to move forward, and it takes a lot of that risk out, and it takes a lot of the guesswork out overall. Because now you're flying that drone out and you're looking at reporting marks. You can type the reporting marks into an app called AskRail. It's a free app available to all public safety. All they type is that UTLX, that SMTX number on the side of the rail car. You type that into the app and it tells you exactly what's inside. Well, now I know exactly how to respond. I don't have to walk up close to it. I don't have to get close to the fire. I don't have to expose myself. I fly the drone over and take a look, fly back, suit up, get to work.
Right on. So I would think with those types of incidents, the same challenges exist that we see at wildfires incidents, where you've got manned aircraft, helicopters, tankers coming in, and we're all hearing the stories about how a drone caused the helicopters to have to land or move away. I mean, are you seeing that problem occurring with the larger train derailments, where there's going to be news helicopters, potentially first responder helicopters? Is that like a problem at this point?
TFRs are a big help on incidents like that, and most news agencies, I think they get a bad rap because there were a few rogue operators there in the beginning, and the entire media's reputation is based on those early reports. Nowadays, you see the media being much more respectful of the scene. They'll stay off and use telephoto lenses to get the information that they need, which frees us up to fly overhead. We don't need to fly hundreds of yards over a derailment. We're typically just right over the top of it. We're not flying all around. We're not flying down to the lake. We're not flying over a neighborhood. We're just flying over the derailment scene. And for the most part, media, they're very respectful of that overall. So we don't really run into that. It's kind of a non-discussion on an emergency scene because media knows to be respectful. Otherwise, they won't be flying anymore.
Yeah.
Nobody wants that. Everybody wants to operate in the airspace.
Well, and we also train with air, on the PIO side if you use the PIOs and work with the drone teams to get the visual imagery and get the video and give it to the media, and they don't even have to fly, and you're pre-packaging the video for them, then they're usually pretty happy with that and they'll run with it. Unless it's an active scene with weird kinds of colored smoke and clouds emerging from the wrecked rail cars, then yeah, they want that live video to stream forward and flash all over the world.
The best time to figure that out is before the accident happens, though. A lot of people are scared to talk across lines, especially public safety to the private sector. And the media can be a huge asset if you just talk to them. Pick up the phone, call them, and say, "Hey, what would you do if we had this incident? Do you know we fly drones?" Have that conversation, what we call tabletops in public safety. Have a little tabletop. So let's say we have a derailment at this bridge. What would your plan be? What's my plan? How can we make the two work together better so that we're both safer, we're both more efficient, but we both overall accomplish our task?
And that's something that drone responders has actually been working on with the National Press Photographers Association, NPPA, just to open up that dialogue for so many reasons between public safety and journalists. I mean, I think there's enforcement issues, and we don't need to go down this complete rat hole, but there's issues with, some police and some law enforcement not knowing the scope of their authority when media are on scene conducting a flight operation. And then, but at the end of the day, to your point, getting that common ground and opening up the lines of communication are so essential. And especially in jurisdictions where you're going to have the same media folks and the same public safety people operating. I think we see that already with the helicopter pilots around the country. You've got the media pilots and the air rescue or the PD pilots all kind of know each other because they're all up in the helicopters. And I think that's going to happen with the drones eventually, but we're kind of trying to push that conversation. Yeah. Yeah. So you were recently working a train derailment. Can you tell us a little bit about what that experience was like?
And so a big part of what we do out here is pushing the envelope to try to figure out where things fail, where things work best, how we can make them better. Everything from the metallurgy of what's used into the process that we use to do different things. So derailments are just a part of what we do out here. We expect it to happen. We have controls in place. But one of the cool things about drones now is that we don't have to spend 2 or 3 days mapping the scene out with a tape measure and a whole bunch of people running around the track. I can use software like Pix4D, create some ground control points. We have this whole survey team that works out here full time. So we can set our ground control points. I can fly the scene, and most of the little derailment scenes that we do here, I can have flown in 7 to 10 minutes, and then we're done. We do the post-processing, and we find that we know what our margins of error are. So we measure the important parts of the derailment by hand. We leave the rest of it to the drone. And it makes life a lot easier. And we're trying our best to push that out in the field as well. All the Class 1 railroads look to us to see how all that works. And we do our best to find out new ways to do things safer. And drones is just the big thing that we're doing now. It's amazing what the software will do to save you time, money, and safety overall.
And along those lines of trying to make things safer, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't at least mention the COVID-19 pandemic. And we've seen a lot of, and I've been asking all the guests about this, but we've seen various use cases emerging, drones disinfecting areas, drones used for social distancing. From the research we've done with air and drone responders, the biggest use case out there has been public information, just gathering video imagery for media use or for public information use. But what's your take on what you've seen? I mean, we're about 4 months into this pandemic, I guess, on U.S. soil. What's your thoughts on unmanned systems and unmanned aircraft systems specifically being used to combat this pandemic?
So to answer this question, I'm going to step out of my official role as a SERTC instructor, and I'm going to step into Brandon's shoes.
Oh, fair enough.
So this is by no means the opinion of SERTC or anybody that I work for overall. So keeping that in mind, I think it's very important that we address the image issue that drone use has, especially from a public safety standpoint. From the fire service side of things, nobody cares what the fire service does. Everybody loves a firefighter, but right now with the current climate that's surrounding law enforcement, I think it's very important to have the conversation about what image that portrays. There's still a lot of people that hang on to that predator drone image, that government Overwatch image that drones have. And then when you're out there with a speaker on top of this thing, please step away from that, but you're not 6 feet away. That gives a really bad image to public safety's drone use overall, and especially a law enforcement side of things. So I think anytime something like that is considered, you need to have the image conversation. Is this going to set our entire drone program back because we don't want to climb on top of a pole and install a speaker?
Yeah, and I think, something else we've talked about is it's really important to know who the news media is in your jurisdiction if you're going to be conducting those operations, because in certain areas like New York, like LA, you can expect that the media is going to be up in arms over drones used for any kind of chastising people. But maybe in a local area where you've got a really good relationship with the media, they're going to be a little more accepting of that, and the story won't have that strong slant that we've seen kind of running nationally. But I think at the end of the day, it is really important to talk with the PIO, to talk with the leadership, and to have that discussion strategically. Like, what is this going to do to the public image of our program? Because as we saw last year with the research we've conducted through drone responders, garnering a positive public perception of public safety drone operations is one of the top 3 wish list items for most public safety agencies. So we've got to really make sure we're taking the due diligence and the necessary steps to make that happen. Are there any use cases you've seen that you think, well, that's kind of interesting, that might work to help fight COVID?
Not so far. I'm kind of a realist. I'm all about accomplishing a task based on the most efficient way to take care of it. And a lot of these cases, people are doing it just because, and I'm all about that. Hey, let's do it, but just don't do it publicly where it's going to set everybody's drone programs back overall. I haven't seen anybody accomplish anything specifically targeting COVID with a drone that couldn't be accomplished better by another method. And you're just giving the image that we're too scared to walk up and do it ourselves. And I don't like the image that pushes out to the public, that this thing is so scary that public safety won't walk up to me and have a conversation. People that are trained to respond to this, people that are trained to run into biological hazards and hazmat situations are not willing to walk up and have a conversation with me. They've got to fly a drone up and embarrass me in front of everybody in this park. Things like that really bother me about those, is people aren't walking that all the way through. And I think in some cases, maybe it even accelerates the panic because people are along those same thought lines that I was just outlining, that they can't be here because it's so dangerous. Maybe I'll just go home and lock the doors and get depressed.
That's a very fair point and a great perspective. All right, so let's switch gears. We've seen some new aircraft in the smalls category be introduced over the last couple of weeks. We've got Parrot coming out with the Anafi USA. 2 weeks ago, we had Skydio announce the Skydio X. What are your thoughts on kind of this new push for this next wave of small UAS technology that seems to be appearing? Is this what public safety is looking for, and what do you think that the folks you work with are looking for?
Again, I think it's important to ask, what do you want to accomplish before you ever look at any of this new technology that's coming out? Make a list of everything you want your drone to do. Make it, priority based. I needed to do this primarily, and it would have a necessary list and it'd be a really nice list, and work off of that, regardless of what new technology or new whiz bang gadgets come out. Always address it from that point of view. I think, what do I need to accomplish with this drone? And if there's a different platform out there that accomplishes more of your task, I think it would be better to go to that. But it's really exciting. I love all the technology that's coming out, and you'd be amazed at the other industries that it's pushing that we see from a technology standpoint for transportation, that drones are pushing, like IMUs, for example. IMUs are used on more than just drones. People didn't create IMUs just for drones. But the economy of scale that's being created with the technology surrounding drones are making it accessible for other technologies that normally wouldn't have access to it. So things like what you're talking about right now with all these new drones that are being announced, the new technology surrounding them, I'm more excited about what it does to us globally than just in the drone world.
Gotcha. And, I think you hit on a really great point, is what is the mission? What do you want to accomplish with the drone? And I think, one part that people kind of might miss when they get excited about the new technology coming out is there's going to be a lag time for the integration with some of the software systems you might be using. I mean, just because manufacturer A or manufacturer B comes out with a new drone doesn't mean that software provider A, and let's say like a Pix4D, is going to have that drone integrated right away into whatever software program you might be working with, Pix4D or Drone Deploy or whoever else it might be. So just because the aircraft is there doesn't mean you're going to have the full capability. And with DJI having so much market share, I mean, it's obvious that the software applications are going to keep focusing on making sure that DJI aircraft are working, first before they maybe bring on board some of these other aircraft. So I would think that
Inspire 2 is a great example of what you're talking about, right? Everybody in public safety had the Inspire 1. You could mount a thermal underneath it. You could have a RGB camera. Woohoo, this thing's great. Oh, Inspire 2, it must be better than Inspire 1. I wonder how many departments ran out, bought an Inspire 2, got it in, and then realized, oh, crap, I can't use cameras. I can't mount a thermal in there. That's the kind of thing that you're talking about. The Inspire 2 is a great case study on that.
Yeah, if the software is not going to allow payloads in software applications, I mean, it's almost like you've got to take a wait and see approach after the aircraft comes out to say, okay, how am I going to be able to use this, and am I going to be able to accomplish what I want to with this for the mission sets we have?
Let's work the kinks out of it before I order it.
Hey, there's an idea. So we've got just a couple minutes left. I mean, what are your thoughts on the future of unmanned systems, unmanned aircraft systems with public safety, with HAZMAT, just with disaster response, incident response? I mean, what are you most excited about as you come to work every day at this point?
I'm excited about just having a job at this point.
Good point.
I'm excited about. No, I think it's important to realize that our fates rest in the FAA's hands. Anything that you want to do is going to have to go through the FAA. It does not matter what it is. So what I get most excited about is when I see people getting involved in things that have to do with the FAA. Get involved with the Drone Advisory Council. Get involved on their website. Get involved just writing letters and making comments when they publish different papers. Make sure that you get your voice heard. So that's what I get most excited about, is when public safety gets involved and gets out there and gives their opinion to make sure that our needs are considered as well. I think that's the biggest need right now is realizing that the FAA has to approve anything exotic that we do. So get involved, get your voice heard, make your case, show that we're advancing things safely, and accomplish your task.
Fair enough. And finally, I just want to make sure anyone who's looking for more information on the Security and Emergency Response Training Center, or SERTC, the URL is sertc.org, sertc.org. In any tips you have on how they should get in touch with you guys if they want to learn more about how they can train with you or the types of training you offer?
It's pretty easy to get to us through the website, through the contact us link up top. A majority of the training that we offer is free. It's federally funded. So all of our core classes, hazmat tech, tank car specialist, highway emergency response specialist, all of our core classes are funded. We even have a tactical class for transportation. So all of those are federally funded, which means that there's paperwork to do, right? So make sure that you're going through the process properly. And if you need help with that process, get a hold of us through the website, and we will hold your hand and walk you through the process of getting that funding through your department. You basically just put in an application. Your state, what's called your SAA, will approve it. It goes back to whoever your commanding officer is, and then you can come out here and train. You're paid door to door. From the time you walk out of your front door to the time you walk back in it, you're paid mileage. Your airplane is paid for. Your rental car, your food, the class, the hotel, everything is paid for from the time you leave your house to the time you get back. So if I'm going to give you a tip, it's if you don't understand the process, get a hold of us and we'll walk you through the process.
And that is one hell of a deal in an environment where a lot of public safety agency budgets might be stressed due to the COVID-19 response and other responses with protests and things like that. Free training from SERTC. Again, that URL is sertc.org. Brandon, this has been a fascinating conversation. You've got to come back and join us again real soon, because I think we're going to have a lot more to talk about in the coming months.
Happy to do so. Just let me know when.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you've been chatting with Brandon Dean Morris, Hazardous Materials Instructor at the Security and Emergency Response Training Center. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time on the next edition of Taming Disaster, Drones for Good. Thanks for joining.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Taming Disaster, a production of AIRT, the world's leading nonprofit organization supporting drones for good. Learn more about us online at airt.ngo. And be sure to tune in to our public safety focused podcast, Drone Responders, hosted by Charles Werner.